Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Peace be upon you all. Bismillah. Rabbi shrah li sadri, wa yassir li amri, wahlul uqdatam min lisani, yafqahu qawli. I began with a short prayer, or a dua, that translates to, O my Lord, expand my heart and make my task easy for me. Loosen the knots in my tongue so that they may understand my speech. There's an old Cherokee folk tale about a great ball game. It was played long ago between the birds and the land animals. The birds claimed the skies, and the land animals claimed the earth. And each side argued over which was superior. When the game began, a small creature arrived, a bat. The bird said, "You can't join us. You have teeth and you have fur." The land animals said, "You can't join us either. You have wings. You're not one of us." The bat was left out, neither bird nor beast, belonging nowhere. But while the animals played all the way until nightfall, the bat didn't hide or disappear. He used his night vision, his gift of navigating darkness, and his very practical talent for eating mosquitoes that bothered those animals playing at night. He ended up helping everyone. In the end, what's the lesson of this folktale? He reminded them, and this can remind us, that diversity of our strengths can be something to celebrate, not scoff at. And that brings me to the first potential lesson of radical inclusion. Celebrate what makes us different. That could make us special. But here's the thing, we live in times where sometimes inadvertently, we mimic those old ways of the land animals and the birds. You have to actively seek different and seek to include. Our worlds have gotten smaller, even though the world connects more. We've built echo chambers. AI can complete our sentences and validate our biases. And social media continues to show us the same voices, the same faces, until we start to believe that our circle is the world. Several years ago, a woman I somewhat knew came up to me and asked, "May I ask you something?" She said, "Ever since 9/11 happened, I wondered, how could I not hate you? I feel like I've been taught to do so." At first, I wasn't sure what to say, but I realized she wasn't really attacking me. She was genuinely asking. And that is where healing begins. In conversation. We sat down, we talked, we found pieces of ourselves within each other. And I do believe that when we listen with our hearts, we have little place for hate to live. So how can we actually practice and find the beauty in radical inclusion, internally and externally? First, potentially practicing hospitality of the heart. Before we open our doors to others, open your hearts and potentially replace suspicion with curiosity. Greet that stranger within you, the part that fears and the part that doubts. Next, humanity in action. Radical inclusion goes beyond inviting someone to the table. It's about rebuilding the table through a series of small, brave acts. Of course, sitting next to someone alone, but actively discussing how to break down the barriers that made them feel alone in the first place. And finally, a practice of leading with heart. Because the heart, when it is open, creates ripple effects. An act of welcome can echo through generations. One conversation can potentially soften centuries of misunderstanding. So today, in this Festival of Faith session, as we hear our panelists, I invite us to all ask ourselves two key things. Who have I left out of my circle? And how might I consciously draw it wider? The first person I'm honored to introduce is Dr. Simran Jeet Singh. Please welcome Dr. Simran.
Thank you, Janan. Hi, everyone. Good morning. The one thing that didn't get mentioned in the bio that I should say is I'm from San Antonio, Texas. So being in Louisville feels kind of like being home. New York is a different kind of place. So Louisville feels familiar. Although, one of my daughters came up to me recently, and she said, "Hey, Dad, I know since you grew up in San Antonio, you're a Spurs fan. And so I'm growing up in New York, can I be a Knicks fan?" And my heart, I questioned my priorities as a parent. I questioned why was God punishing me? Do I believe in God? All these things. And so I share it because it's a small story of how hard it can be to live with people who are different from you. I haven't talked to my daughter in 6 months now, so no, I'm kidding. We're fine, but really, like the real reflection that's emerged from this is, now the stakes are low, right? It's a basketball team, but what happens when she comes to me and says, "Hey, Dad, I don't want to practice this religion anymore," or "I want to date someone you don't approve of," or "I want to move across the country. Oh my God, I want to move across the country to California," right? Like, what am I going to do? And I'm realizing that as hard as those things might be for me, if this is the most precious relationship in my life, I have to figure out how to get over my own issues, right? It's not about her, it's me. And if I'm not able to do that, then I'm risking something that I'm not really willing to risk, right? So I better figure it out. And I'm also realizing that if I can't do that in the most intimate relationship of my life, right, where I believe there's unconditional love, then what chance do I have with the rest of the world? Right, and so I'm really thinking about this from in a personal way, right? Like, how do I raise these kids? How do I change myself? How do I grow? But the stakes are actually pretty significant. This is the question of our times, right? How do we learn to share the planet with one another? And I think our wisdom traditions have some answers for this, right? Like, it seems like our culture doesn't really have good answers for this. As much as we've sort of experimented and tried, we're really struggling. And I'm looking back at these different traditions that I've studied, that I explore, my own, and there's this sort of foundational teaching in Sikh wisdom is where I often go back, and it's ikonkar. It's the first word in our scriptures. It's the first word I learned as a kid growing up in Texas. First word my parents learned growing up in India. First word my kids learned in New York, right? And the teaching is about the oneness of creation. And it's not I don't think it's a particularly, it's not exclusive to the Sikh tradition, right? In Islam, you might call it Tawheed. In Buddhism, you might call it interdependence. So we have our own versions of this. But it's something that in a context, in a society where we are really trying to figure out how to deal with difference, we often overlook this sort of profound core of what connects us all. And so there's a lot to draw from this, right? Including, at least within the Sikh tradition, one of the primary next steps you take theologically is non-discrimination, right? There is no place for judgment on the basis of caste or class or gender or sexual. It's just not. It's not an option for us, right? And this is a core teaching in our tradition. And yet we live in a world that is so structured on the basis of hierarchy and supremacy, where we are constantly trying to prove that I'm actually better than you, right? We're competing. It's capitalistic. We need more because there's scarcity. And this idea of our interconnection, it sort of washes away. And I want to share with you all sort of two experiences in my life that have been challenges about this as they relate to belonging. One comes from when I was 18 years old, a senior in high school. I'd grown up in San Antonio. Senior year is supposed to be the best year. I got a car. I wasn't ever going to go to class, right? Like everything was great. I was captain of the soccer team, so like I could do whatever I wanted. And the semester started, and the first week of school, we heard about terrorist attacks in New York City. And I remember, as many of you probably do, where I was. We ran to our social studies teacher's classroom, where we watched the television and watched the towers go down. And I remember after about half an hour, the news anchor said, "We have a suspect." And they put up a photo of Osama bin Laden. And I watched my classmates and my teacher look at the screen and then look at me. And I was like, oh my God, my life is never going to be the same. And my mom picked us up pretty much immediately, my brothers and me, and took us home. And I remember we locked the door, which we never used to do growing up. And the next several days, I mean, there was something very confusing about it, right? Like all of a sudden, here I am as someone who sees himself as an American, born and raised in this country, feeling like, at least in my lifetime, this is the first time it felt like we were vulnerable, right? An attack on our soil. It had never occurred to me that it would be possible. And so I'm trying to grapple with that, but also within hours of being home, we started getting our first death threats. And first it was people calling, and then people driving by. And the strangeness of understanding that the way you see yourself doesn't match up with the way that other people see you. That's true for all of us, right? We all experience this in some ways. People are making assumptions about us based on how we dress or how we look or what our accent might be or whatever, right? Like people are always making assumptions. This was sort of an extreme version of that, right? Like I dealt with racism most of my life growing up in Texas. But somehow in this moment, I had become the enemy, right? Like the spitting image, the stereotype of like who people thought their enemy was. And I didn't know what to do about that. And so this period for me was, it was a moment of like that intense, dark feeling of like, you don't have a home. You don't belong here. You're not one of us. We don't want you. And in fact, we're going to attack you. We'd rather have you dead. So that's sort of the first vignette I wanted to offer you. I know it's kind of a sad one. And then I want to offer you a more hopeful one, although it starts also like sad, even more sad maybe, so like just bear with me. So fast forward a decade. I've sort of figured out how I want to navigate the sort of challenges of being visibly different in this country, right? And the particular challenges of wearing a turban and having a beard in this country. In 2012, a white supremacist walked into a Sikh place of worship in Wisconsin, and he massacred the congregation as they prayed. And it's a story you might remember. It didn't happen too far from here. Unfortunately, there are many stories like this that if you don't remember that one, you probably remember Tree of Life Synagogue or AME Church in Charleston, or these many instances, including more recently, right, the Mormon Church in Michigan recently, of these attacks on people who are in their places of worship, thinking they have sanctuary, and they don't. And I just remember, I mean, I'll tell you that experience really affected me. I wasn't there. It's not a community that I knew very well. My sister-in-law is from there, and my brother happened to be there that weekend, and so like there was some personal fear. But the depth of my emotional response was something I hadn't encountered before. I was so mad. I was so mad. And I'm not, I mean, I know I'm from New York. I'm not the mad type, right? Like, you can probably tell by my disposition. Like, I'm pretty laid back, and this is like the most angry I've ever felt in my life. And the anger lasted for months. And I tried everything I had developed as a skill or as a tool to deal with my anger, right? People told me, you should forgive the killer, which I didn't really know what to do with. Like, the killer, he took his own life before he could be held accountable. He never apologized. And I also know that asking people to forgive it's racialized, right? Like, who do we typically tell you should forgive? And it didn't feel right to me, right? Like, how could you forgive someone who never felt remorse for what they did? And in other cases that had helped me, but it just didn't feel natural or helpful, and it just wasn't working for me. And then another tool that I had developed over time was try to get to know people and find your commonalities, right? Like, you might be sitting next to someone on an airplane, and this has happened to me where they're watching a news channel that you're like, oh no, right? Like, this person, I have nothing in common with this person. And then you start talking, and you're like, of course I do, right? Like, we're talking about sports, or the other day I was talking to somebody who had a totally different political view about his cancer recovery. And I was like, I can talk about that. I know people in my family. There's so much that connects us. So I tried to do this with this white supremacist, and I learned everything I could about his life. I couldn't find anything. Like, there was nothing, even like the smallest thing, right? If it said, I don't know, he's a football fan, I'd be like, cool, me too, like maybe, but it just like, it wasn't working for me. And then there was a third strategy I'd used was like, okay, maybe, and this is maybe a little more scholarly for me, but it's like, get into it academically. Like, get to know their ideology. And maybe you can understand it, even if you don't agree with it. And so I started going onto the white supremacist message boards. He was one of the leaders of a major one called Hammerskins. I don't recommend anybody ever going to one of these message boards. It was really rough. I was looking for something, I couldn't find it. It just made me more upset. And I was so mad still, right? Months had passed, and this person had so much hatred in his own heart that he couldn't control it, and he had ruined the lives of these other people, and he was ruining my life, right? Like, I was still feeling it every day. And then what ultimately emerged for me, and an idea that I want to offer to you all, is I was going through a training around unconscious bias, which I'm guessing many of you in this room have done before. And what was hard about it for me was that I had fallen into a binary of victim and perpetrator, right? There are people who are the victims, and I was one of those, right? Like, brown skin, turban, beard, post 9/11, like, you've heard the story, right? Like, I am the person who racism happens to. And as I started going through these trainings, I started to understand, oh wait, like, some of these ideas are inside of me too. And I'd never been willing to accept that, right? Because I was so entrenched in this idea that, like, oh, those are the bad guys. And here's what I want to offer you, right? Like, I don't think it's a new idea to say, like, these things are true about us. But I think what happened to me is the introspection and the honesty that emerges from recognizing my own imperfections enabled me to accept this other person's imperfections. And I was realizing that I had a double standard, right? I was being hypocritical, expecting someone else to be perfect when I myself wasn't perfect. And I think that's part of our problem in our society today, right? We have a bar where we're constantly pointing at other people and saying, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And that leads to constant exclusion, right? Again, the white supremacist story is like, that's an extreme version of that. We have much smaller versions of that, including the guy who I sat next to on the airplane the other day. right? Like I was ready to be like, you're out, right? Like you're not one of me. But actually the ability to introspect, which is a spiritual tool that our traditions give us, if we can embody that and accept our own imperfections, right? The humility that we're taught, that gives us an opportunity to then have grace for other people and not hold them to the impossible bar. Our imperfection, our fallibility, is what makes us human. And that is what opens up the possibility for grace. Thank you.
So you opened with the story of your children, your daughter, and I'm just curious, how much do they understand the depth of the pain that you have faced, and then this coming to terms with ways that you can look within? So how much are you instilling in your children as they're young?
It's so hard. I mean, for those of you who are parents of any age, you're probably dealing with what I am, which is like, I want my girls to understand the world. I also want to protect them from the world.
Yeah.
I want to prepare them for the kinds of challenges they'll face. I also don't want to read my experiences into their lives, right? Like the other day, there was a big election in New York City. You might have heard about it. And I was talking to my girls about it, and like one of the challenges that I have, they're 7 and 9, so you can kind of like understand the age I'm working with. Like, I don't want them to parrot my political views. So I'm not like trying to brainwash them, but I also want to share with them my values and why I'm making certain decisions, and like start to prepare them for that. And so all of this is to say, like, how do you instill these ideas and these experiences without creating the same script that people are constantly following, where they're expecting to be hurt and therefore fearful of being open to one another. And so it almost feels like a dance. Every time we have a conversation about the world, it's also like, but what are the values, right? Like, what is going to give, what is the compass I can give you so that when you meet the moment, when someone says something to you on the basis of your religion or race or gender, whatever, like, what kind of person do you want to be? There's a world in which they'll eventually read my memoir. Like, I think they're ready, although there are cuss words in the first few pages, and so I'm like, not yet. Like, they don't know that I know the cuss words yet, so at some point they can. But I do want to share with them that, like, maybe here's another way to say it. If my goal for my kids and for all of us is to have more empathy, there is real value in sharing experiences that are not their own, where they can understand, hey, this is someone I love and something that they went through that I'm not going to experience in the same way, but that doesn't matter. Like, their experience is what I want to honor and respect, and then also learn from in some way. So that's sort of what I'm thinking about. Yeah.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's amazing. And now, to transition, I want to tell you all about our next guest. Please welcome Nat Weber.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. This is really my first time in Louisville. I was here briefly for a few hours many years ago. But in terms of feeling like I belong, I've just been asking everyone in the past few days, where do you go to high school? And I felt that belonging. So I feel like one of you. So today I'm here with a lot of joy in my heart and a lot of appreciation for the people who have brought me. And I want to share with you my pedagogical style is storytelling. I come from this long line of Irish storytellers, and my mom always said the best way to teach is through story. So I'm going to share 2 stories with you all today. And they're going to be rooted in this sort of Ignatian tradition of finding God in all things, or to put another way, finding the sacred in the secular. So my whole life growing up, my mother would often quote this to me, which was, Matt, we had the experience, but we missed the meeting. And it was oftentimes I would do something, and then I would move on to the next thing, and she would just say, pause. Why did you do that? What did you learn from that? What was important about that? And I think it's really important for us to be thinking about the things that we see and do and experience on a daily basis, and how often we're pausing, we're stopping, and we're wondering, why? What is that? What does that mean? Not to be missed. So I'm going to bring you back to 2018 of an experience. That is the University of Virginia logo. And I don't know who did that. I liked it. There we go. And I started a new job at the University of Virginia. And on my desk on my first day was this decal. And I got it and I showed it to my wife, and I said, I'm going to put this on our car. We're Charlottesville people. We didn't know anyone in Charlottesville, but like I had this decal, and this meant something. This was a symbol. It was a sign. It was a sign of belonging, that I was part of this community. And my wife said, you can't put that on your car. I said, why? She goes, well, because you didn't go to the University of Virginia. I said, but I worked there. And she goes, no. That means you went there. And it got me thinking all about what is this symbol? What is this sign? What do all of these things do? If I wore a cross on my neck, what does that mean? And I sort of became really interested in symbols and signs. And I'm going to bring you down two roads, two very quick acts. The first one, secular, social, University of Virginia, 2018. I joined Jim Ryan. So I worked with him for many years at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He became president of UVA. And his pitch to me was, come to Charlottesville. I want you to help me be a 21st century president, work in my office. But more importantly, this is what happened the year before. And that is what most people knew about Charlottesville. If you say Charlottesville even now, this is what people think. And I saw this moment as someone who cares deeply about my work vocationally as, let me come and help heal. Let me come to this community, a community where I knew one person, and a community where I knew nothing about any of the traditions, and how can I come and help this community heal? So I took this big leap with my wife, and we moved to Virginia, and we had a 1-year-old, and this was me on my first day. Let's get a closer look. Okay? Do you want to zoom in a little more? Okay? And a little bit more? There we go. Okay? That was me for my first 2 years. This was a leap of faith of trying to figure out, what does belonging look like? How am I part of this community? How can I help heal without knowing the community, without knowing the questions to ask, without understanding the symbols? And I kept thinking, like, a big part and a big takeaway, I hope, from this 10 minutes or so is you need to approach belonging with a lot of humility. And if you can bring humility to belonging, I think that will help ease the process of feeling that belonging. And I think it's totally okay to know that in that humility, there's going to be a lot of uncomfortability. And for me, going and entering this community at the University of Virginia, like, I was trying to learn what to do, and the best way to do that was to just jump in. So I taught, I enrolled in classes, I joined committees, I even joined the homeowners association on my street, and I hiked, and I took squash lessons, and I learned to drink this new drink that I had never heard of called bourbon. That's a thing you do in Virginia and in Kentucky, I hear. And this was like me understanding what it's like, the symbols and signs of a community, of what it means to be part of it. And I was doing that for 2 years, and then the community of the University of Virginia, as we knew it, just stopped. And everyone was sent home in March of 2020. And my boss, Jim Ryan, looked at me and said, Matt, how do we maintain belonging? How do we maintain some elements of the magic of what this place is by being on these grounds when everyone is fractured and sent home and we're all on Zoom? And I said, well, you know what? I think there's a couple symbols and signs and things that represent catalysts and agents of these things that we love and care for, these conveners that could help. And he said, well, what? And I said, what about, and I'm not joking here, what if the mascot played a role? And the mascot of the University of Virginia is the caveman. And the caveman program was over because all the students were sent home. And I said, what if we decided that this superhero, this agent of the university, was not sent home and was not shut down, but we put this agent in our time of need most to build community, to add to the magic. And the president said, if you can find the suit, you can wear it, go for it. So from 2020 to 2021, I was a 6'3" off-brand caveman. And what I did, that's me in front of the COVID ward at the UVA hospital. This is me visiting mothers on Mother's Day. This is the whole program we called Random Acts of Caveman, and we put out calls. Anyone in Charlottesville, you want us to Zoom bomb, whatever you want. We want to create community. You may not be able to connect with everyone, but you still can connect with Caveman. If you look really closely, there is very little opportunity to breathe in that head. And when I showed up at this house, they said, we want you to put a mask on. So there's a mask on that head, and I almost passed out multiple times. But to me, this was how to share joy, how to still be an agent of community, of belonging. And it was an understanding the symbol of this typically mascot person who runs around, who supports sports. But I thought he's way more than that. He's not just a cheerleader. So I came back from this experience of visiting over 2,000 people over the course of that 1 year. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to turn this into my dissertation. I was previously working on this notion of university presidents and strategic communications. I came back with the zeal of a convert of what I thought was this magic that I had discovered, that the mascot, and any mascot in any school or organization can do more, can show love. And I came up with this notion of, I think the mascot is both jester and king. And I thought about what is the symbol of the University of Virginia? How is this person helping? How can mascots help? Most of the research on mascots was mostly in the problematic elements of mascots and how they're bad and how they need to change. And I wanted to focus on, well, if that's not the case in this particular case, who can I talk to? How can I learn about mascots? Talk to former mascots, talk to people who received the mascots, and essentially came up with this conceptual framework that I think, you're probably laughing, right? Like, it's a lot of effort on mascots. And yes, you are hearing from the world's only mascot researcher on this topic. But I will tell you, like, the notion of myth-making and ceremony and the symbolic framework and semiotics, all of this funnels down into this very simple thing, which is mascots connect and strengthen. They inspire, they tell story, they seek soul, they help understand, they make meaning. They support the Ignatian idea of God in all things, including mascots, and they support the T.S. Eliot quote of, I had the experience, did I miss the meaning? So that's me as the mascot. There was a lot of weird late adult acne issues with that head. That's not really clear in that picture. And I will tell you, after many, many years at the University of Virginia, if you ask me, do you belong? Yeah, I walked the lawn this past spring with my doctorate. I've got these 3 little kids, and I took that decal, put it right on that car. Which my wife supported. But this is the thing about life, right? Belonging is this thing that's precious. And belonging, I think we like to have the sense that it's permanent, but it may not always feel that way. And if it's not, what happens when your belonging is disrupted? So a few months ago, that very same president that I moved down to Virginia with and worked with for 15 years was forced to resign by the federal government because he was supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion at the University of Virginia. So all of a sudden, the belonging as it relates to him, gone, and then here I am back on my 2018 self trying to figure out, who am I? What is my role here? Why is this important? And it seemed harder to find God in all things. It seemed harder to see the joy. And in these moments, and this is the moment I'm in right now, I drove 8 hours from Charlottesville. We're in this right now with our third president in the past 4 or 5 months. I'm in this moment of figuring out how do I get through it. So I'm going to tell you, like, in the last minute I have here, I'm 100% in Act 2, buttressed by an imperfect faith. So as you heard, I'm Catholic, and I've been Catholic my whole life. I was born in St. Francis Hospital on the Feast of St. Francis in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Thought my parents would have named me Francis. They went with Matthew. Totally fine. But this faith, and my aunt was a nun, a sister of St. Joseph, and my godfather was a priest. And I was in this Catholic bubble for a long time, and this faith always supported me, but it was an untested faith. It was an untested faith until I went to Harvard, my first non-Catholic school my entire life, and that was the first time I was asked a bunch of series of interesting questions when they found out I was Catholic, including, when you play chess, are you overprotective of your bishops? Which is a fun, easy question to answer, but the harder question to me is, Matt, why are you Catholic? And I've been trying to answer that question. I've written books about it. I had this TV show. I didn't want to just tell people I'm Catholic. I wanted to show them. And I wanted to show them the life of being a Catholic in my 20s, now my 30s, and now I'm an old 42-year-old guy. So I want you to all take away from this is that in these moments, thinking about the meaning, thinking about finding the sacred and the secular, thinking about what buttresses you during hard times, coming here, I am not missing the meaning of the Festival of Faith. I am not missing the meaning and the timing of it. And I will tell you, like, yes, there's the V for Virginia, and that's my secular home. And there's the cross, and I'm Catholic, and I'm loving it and trying to make it all work. But I will tell you the fact that I got to come here as the random, I don't know anyone here. I drove here, and I sat down at multiple tables the past 2 days, and I said, hey, I'm Matt Weber, and you all welcomed me with a lot of love at a time when I needed it, so thank you.
That was amazing. And it sounds like you figured out, like some have figured out, that being uncomfortable can be transformative. And you shared exactly what you did. Can you tell us a little bit more for those that are listening of being uncomfortable is hard. So was that more the things that you chose to immerse yourself in, did you feel it was more for you? Or was it so that you could feel like you could belong? Or explain this
I think
this
a little bit
concept.
of both, yeah. So it's a both and approach. I think, whenever you're entering a community, and whether that's a conference when you're showing up without a group, or whether that's you're moving down to a new city, or joining a new church or synagogue, or whatever your faith community is, I think there has to be a give and take. Yeah. There has to be an openness of sharing who you are, which involves vulnerability and involves discomfort. Yes. And then you have to have this expectation that some of it will come back to you, right? And then if you share some of yourself, the group and the folks will share some of their self back. And I found it's much easier. We're talking about kids. Like, I have 3 little kids. It's much easier facilitating those experiences with kids because they're a natural sort. It's like, how do you want to make friends? Go to a dog park. There's a lot of dogs, and you can talk about dogs, right? Same thing with kids. You go to a school, and you already have this naturally baked-in experience. And when I was leaving Cambridge, I had a friend that said, "You're going to be fine. Just find a nice church, and it will be welcoming, and you will already have a community baked in based on your faith." So I looked at sort of my UVA experience work and then my church experience, St. Thomas Aquinas, and I saw those as the 2 places where I could hopefully engage in most to build a community and to build a new life. Because I think if you don't put in the effort, there's a chance you end up on an island. And you do your thing, and it's fine, but you probably don't get the richness of it. In the same way, I sat down at random tables and met very wonderful people at the things. I could have stayed home and ordered pizzas. I didn't do that. I'm glad I didn't do that. I've heard Louisville, where's the good pizza? I don't know. Someone's got to help me out with that.
We'll tell you.
Okay.
That was amazing. Thank you both so far,
Yeah,
and
you're welcome.
can't wait to hear from you.
Thank you for inviting me to share space and time and conversation with you today. I am grateful to be here with my Berea College colleagues, not least of all, our Dean of the Chapel and Interfaith Services at the college, Reverend Dr. Lisette Wright, from whom I learned so many of my lessons. Like me, Reverend Dr. Lisette Wright also shared a close friendship with Bell Hooks during the final years of her life. Bell Hooks' homegoing in December 2021 was a personal loss for us and a political loss for a world she feared was already beginning to forget her dissident feminism. I've been thinking a lot about those lessons, and especially about what it means that Assata Shakur died this year on the date of Bell's birth, on what would have been Bell's 73rd birthday, reminding us that Bell's call to love was a call to arms. And I will be calling her Bell as I speak because we did share a personal relationship. In a poem, Assata Shakur writes, quote, "You died, I cried, and kept on getting up. A little slower and a lot more deadly." The intertextuality of Assata Shakur and Bell Hooks' interventions only makes sense if we read and understand Bell's writings on love in conversation with her spiritual teachings. In her 2014 commencement address to Berea College graduates, Bell explains, quote, "A commitment to spiritual life necessarily means that we embrace that love is all." She continues, quote, "If you are seeking a spiritual foundation for your life, or if you are simply longing to live, QMAT, a meaningful life, love can guide you." Relatedly, on the voicemail recording that she took with her from home to home in Berea, Bell recited the refrain, penned in All About Love, New Visions, quote, "All awakening to love is spiritual awakening." Bell called on those of us who called on her to enact love as a spiritual practice that, quote, "connects and liberates us," strengthening our, quote, "collective willingness to be bold in telling the truth and hearing the truth." When I met Bell in 2019, I was very much and still am a feminist agitator, invested in radical truth-telling, but not in love. I was, as Bell scolded me every time she saw me, strident. What I wanted was to set the world on fire so that something new could grow from its ashes in what Christina Sharp might call its wake. From then on, after meeting, I was Bell's Iranian. At other times, she called me a prophet of doom, someone who thought too critically at the expense of my joy, forsaking love. I think she saw in me and my quarrel with institutional inequity some of herself and what the Academy took from her, and it did take from her. Bell recounted that when she fell ill several years earlier, it felt as though a balloon had popped and deflated. She attributed this to the unsustainable rate at which she wrote and taught, and she was concerned that I was doing the same. It was my relationship with Bell that taught me that love, a strident love, an urgent love, an anarchic love assembled, as Saidiya Hartman might write in a, quote, riotous manner, is what will strike the match that burns down the master's house. Love as rage, Bell writes, is, quote, profoundly political, explaining, quote, our deepest revolution will come when we understand this truth. Interestingly, Bell learned to enact love as radical truth-telling, as a spiritual praxis, not from liberal academia or from the leftist halls of America, for example, at Stanford, where she studied as an undergraduate, but from the, quote, hillbilly country folk who were her ancestors and kin, in, quote, the Kentucky backwoods. Even as she gained national and even international recognition, this, Kentucky, is where she felt herself to belong. Taking her lessons of inclusion from hills and hollers, When she joined Berea College's faculty in 2004, she explained, quote, all of who I am, spiritual seeker, and that came first, spiritual seeker, intellectual, writer, feminist, critic, was a seed planted in the soil of Kentucky. Here is where I live, intentionally she chose to live, and here's where my body will return to earth, nurturing seeds for future harvest. And yet, when I arrived at her doorstep in 2019 with a bouquet of flowers I could not afford, Belle was worried that I, an Iranian American from Southern California, would not find belonging here. She continued with a nod and a wink and a smile, as was her way. She said that she was originally against my hire. And when I, with curiosity, was just asked why, she said that she could not imagine a woman of Iranian descent finding home in Berea. So when she wasn't calling me her Iranian, she was calling me a prophet of doom, right? You know, I find a lot of my own belonging in Berea, much like Belle did. In the dedication of her 2009 book, Belonging, A Culture of Place, she literally credits her community of, quote, everyone in Berea, and then names the white people who have provided her with community. She says, Kentucky is, quote, a culture of belonging rooted in the earth, not the world, but the earth. She makes a distinction between the environmental activism of liberal wokeness and the ecological activism, right, that we might alternatively understand, much like my friends here do, which is a kind of interdependence, right? A oneness of all life against and beyond a hierarchy of being. She sought, quote, a profound relationship with the earth that she felt would be a spiritual location for her. I came to Kentucky, she said, quote, because all that I love remained constant here. And then she quotes, the hills where I roamed my girlhood, the bluegrass beauty, and the vernacular folk. All of me that matters. She defined nature as that site of defiant anarchy that would allow her to extend and live into a love praxis. And that was the site that would create a nourishment for her over and against liberal gaze of modernity. So I'm going to share my own story now, if I may. I never, queer, brown, fat, disabled, never expected to find the kind of belonging that Bell Hooks describes and came home to. In May of 2023, a white woman surgeon at Richmond Baptist Hospital removed a healthy ovary, burned my insides, damaged my intestines, and made me surgically infertile at the age of 37. And as my body changes and my relationship to embodied difference changes, I find myself being even more appreciative of Berea and of Kentucky. Being able to go to a local shop in a muumuu or a hospital gown or pajamas or like this in my fake Gucci, and being treated just the same with the same dignity. And I find this also to resonate with my co-presenters, that there is a kind of humility, right, as Simran described, an earnestness. And I have found that to be so true of Appalachians. I think that Appalachians understand in a way that liberal America doesn't, that there is no pure space of critique, and that we are all just trying our best. You know, thinking about the election in New York, there was a story in the Madison County Observer, an Onion-like publication, that was so real to me and so encapsulated the kind of belonging that people who are imagined as so radically different, it really encapsulates that. So if I may, I'm just going to read it for you all very briefly. If I can find it. Thank you for being patient with me. So, in the wake of our new New York mayor's election, breaking news, thousands line up in Richmond to vote for New York City mayor candidate Zohran Mamdani. Chaos broke out across Madison County Tuesday morning after thousands of residents showed up to polling places that were not open, attempting to cast votes for, quote, New York City mayor candidate Zohran Mamdani, an election that, to the deep frustration of county officials, does not exist in Kentucky. By 8 a.m., and mind you, when I read this, I really thought this was real. By 8 a.m., cars were wrapped around the courthouse, McDonald's, and the Tractor Supply, as voters proudly told bewildered deputies that they were, quote, here to save New York. Quote, I saw on Facebook that we could vote for that one guy with the nice beard, said Richmond resident Pamela Lakes, referring to Zohran Mamdani, a state assemblyman from Queens who is not on any ballot in Kentucky. Quote, I don't like how things are going up there, and I figured we could help. County Clerk Kenny Barber said he arrived at work to find more than 400 people waiting in line, most of them holding expired driver's licenses, and asking if they could do, quote, early voting for Manhattan. Quote, I told one feller, this ain't even an election year, Barber said. He said, quote, well, that's what they want you to think. Then he winked. The situation escalated after someone set up a folding table outside the courthouse with a handwritten sign that read, register here to vote for Zohran. Witnesses say the table was offering free bagels, I Love New York stickers, and wait for it, something called emotional absentee ballots. Kentucky Secretary of State Michael Adams was eventually forced to issue a statement clarifying, quote, Kentuckians cannot under any circumstances vote for the mayor of New York. Despite this, voters continued to insist the state was hiding something. Quote, Michael Adams can say whatever he wants, said lifelong Berea resident Troy Perkins, but I saw a TikTok that said democracy knows no zip code. Reached for comments, Zohran Mamdani appeared genuinely confused, tweeting, deeply honored by the support from the Commonwealth of Kentucky. As of press time, election officials were working to clear the crowd while several residents remained outside chanting, count the New York votes. I share this story simply to say there is something earnest about this place that I have never experienced in liberal America. And that the wokeness that uses us as artifacts for woke liberals' own story, right, does not operate here in the same way. The liberal gaze of modernity that claims to know us, insert meaning into us, operates a little differently in the hills and hollers. And I encourage us to claim that waywardness rather than continuing to try to climb a ladder that can never include us. It was interesting, Matt, in your photo with the president, there was not one person of color in that group, right? For a guy that got fired for DEI, it's interesting the way our personal politics operate. Bernie Sanders came under fire for the way he treated his black women staff. So let's think really critically about this bipartisanship that has, especially in today's America, served to divide us. And let's go a step higher to really think about the liberalism and the liberal humanism that tells us that we are in a hierarchy above and beyond animals, land, the earth that sustains us, the trees that share resources, the fungi that help each other survive. Instead of invoking our humanity, right? And I really do appreciate, Janan, your story at the beginning, right? About land, animals, and birds, right? Maybe that's who we should be learning our lessons from, right? When we say, where's your humanity? And I think to myself, we kill for sport. And there's all these Netflix shows with, interspecies love. That's what I want. So I leave you with Belle's lesson that when we, as she says in Taste of the Earth, when we love the earth, we are able to love ourselves more fully. The ancestors taught me it was so. Belle, now as an ancestor, I hope will continue to impart that lesson on to you. Thank you very much.
I'm quite curious to just find out, since you find such belonging at Berea, tell us a few things that have proved bell hooks wrong, and how have people really made you feel that way? For you,
bell hooks wrong?
Well, that she said you wouldn't find belonging here in Kentucky.
She was worried because I think I arrived at Berea with the task to create a department that was dead and to open a center that didn't exist at the time. And she was like, oh, that's a lot of work, and this girl's not going to have any support.
Yeah.
Interestingly, in Belonging, which I encourage all of you to please read her in her own words describing how belonging operates for her. She says that whiteness is the problem, not white people, and we have forgotten this. Somehow, in the age of Trump, we have returned to an identity politics that we learned long ago only serves to divide, right? And she describes these groups that she had. She called them sister circles. She called them group at other times, in which women were invited, both academic folk from the college, but also people in the community, to have a kind of space where we could create sisterhood. Bell Hooks said, you know, there is no real sisterhood until white women are willing to divest from white supremacy. And interestingly, this conference overlaps with the National Women's Studies Association conference in Puerto Rico this year. I decided to come spend time with y'all instead. But in 2014, Bell Hooks spoke at that conference. Also, it was in Puerto Rico that year. And she said, hold up, watch. Push come to shove. White women will always choose their race, to choose that kind of privilege over and against their gender. And then 2 years later, look what happened. You know, you talked about at the beginning of the introduction, Janan, you talked about something that happens about untied tongues. And that reminded me of Audre Lorde's, you know, she said, you know, what Bell described as imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, that happens on a personal level, on an interpersonal level, when, quote, our tongue skips ahead of our discretion. The guy with the MAGA hat doesn't have no discretion. I know exactly where he stands, right? It's the woke folk that show up at rallies. You know, when Bernie was running in the first time he ran for president, there was a really interesting rally in Seattle in which Marissa Johnson of the BLM movement in Seattle spoke. And all these white liberals, instead of supporting her, it was at the heyday of the BLM movement, were yelling at her, go back to where you're from. She was saying Black Lives Matter. They were saying, we already did that. They were calling her a monkey. And the thing is that is the trickery that scares me. Tell me how it is, right? Similarly, I now have a series of disabilities, including mobility disorders. I can't even take a shower by myself. And there are people who are white who have shown up for me and reminded me that it is not, that this entire notion of identity that as category and type is actually an invention of Enlightenment modernity's concept of time, whereby as we ascend the ladder to civilization, all of a sudden, it's not practice. Gender isn't a practice. Sexuality isn't a practice. It's who you are. And what has been so profound for me is I teach a curriculum that really emphasizes the particularity of anti-Blackness specifically. And we talk about that kind of assumption that people of color are backwards, uncivilized, barbaric. And these Appalachian students, who maybe are white and cisgender, really resonate with that because they too in the hills and hollers are imagined as hillbilly country folk who need the assistance and the civilizational uplift of liberal America. There is a similitude or a possibility for understanding and kinship there, in which I have been surprised by and which I have felt to find belonging in.
Perfect. That's so powerful.
It's just my voice.
We now have the delight to listen to a musical interlude by Shyama Iyer.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. I think that what a beautiful number of thoughts and ideas I'm collecting from our speakers. One thing that I wanted to offer in this song is about using belonging as a starting point that starts from the mind. This piece is written by a saint named Tyagaraja, who lived in South India. He lived from 1767 to 1847. And in this composition, he talks about finding peace of mind. It's in Telugu, the language, Shantamu leka saukyamu ledu, which means if you don't find peace of mind, then you won't have any comfort in life. And as you listen to this piece, I would encourage you to maybe think about a moment when you have felt like you don't belong and what you did in your mind to convince yourself that you did belong, and what power or purpose that gave you. I think that's something really powerful that I find in this piece. And as I go along, I'll offer more translations, but please enjoy. Shantamoleka saukyamuledu Shantamoleka saukyamuledu Shantamoleka saukyamuledu Shantamoleka saukyamuledu Sarasadala nayana Tantunikaina Vedantunikaina Dantunikaina Vedantunikaina Shantamoleka saukyamuledu Sarasadala nayana. You may have a loving spouse, children, wealth in plenty, or you maybe have taken a life where you don't have a spouse or children or wealth. But no matter your circumstance, without peace of mind, there will not be any comfort. Dara sutulu dana danyamulundina Dara sutulu dana danyamulundina Saraku japa tapa sampatagal gina shatamu le ka saukyamu le du perform devout rituals, and you may even know the significance of those rituals. You may know your duties, your karma, and still without finding tranquility in your mind, ritual will not bring you comfort. Yagadi karma mulu anyujesina bhagu gasaka lahrid bhavamu telisina shantamu leka shantamu leka shantamu leka sarasada nayana Thank you.
That was so beautiful. So we have some time left for discussion, and as I was reflecting on what everyone talked about, we see this thread of inner work that you have to do to be radically inclusive. And there was a theme in which we've heard that exclusion can actually shape us as you reflect introspectively. Discomfort can transform us, and love can guide us. And so one thing I'm thinking about is, what is the big difference between being from here versus being welcomed here, wherever that here is? So whoever would like to answer that and share your thoughts, we have about 15 minutes left, so however you'd like to. Don't all raise your hand.
I just am so surprised how much Appalachian hospitality is close to Middle Eastern hospitality. I think that has been a big surprise for me.
I'm glad.
I've been thinking about just, there's the individual, and then there's the individual connected to a community, and whether or not the individual brings themselves to the community or whether the individual absorbs a sort of ethos of the community. And I've found, having lived in New England, and I've lived in Charlottesville, but also just been in places for small amounts of time, you can adapt that spirit of hospitality really quickly if you experience it. And I think it's a real beautiful gift that I think you get to bring back to the community that you're coming from.
Yeah, it's a big question. The difference between being from here,
Wherever here is,
wherever
and then
here is,
being welcomed.
and being welcomed here. I mean, I wonder if arrogance has a lot to do with that. You know, we each mentioned humility in some form in our conversation. And I wonder if a connection between Appalachian hospitality and Middle Eastern Appalachia hospitality.
It's okay. That's what they did to me when I
Thank you. Yeah, and Middle Eastern. I mean, maybe the connection there is a. Well, maybe I'm just sort of pondering. So two thoughts. One is there something about coming from the margins of society, where you know what it's like to be excluded? And you want with every fiber of your body to ensure that nobody goes through what you went through, right? So
maybe to prove yourself.
Right.
To say, we are not the backwards hillbilly you think. Look at our culture. Look what we produce. Look how we contribute to the world.
Yeah.
Look how we can be honorable people.
Yeah.
I think it's more the gaze of modernity to which all of us respond, wanting to be, or not wanting, but being hailed, being interpolated, being called forth by the ways in which we are positioned within a historical trajectory, whereby we have to constantly prove, no, we're modern too. No, we're the first ones who invented that. I often think that my family is like big fat Greek wedding. We were the first ones. But it's like, what is that impulse, right? What is that impulse? Does it come from being perceived as so backwards that you are an artifact of history and not part of the community of man that is growing through and progressing through civilization and now post-humanism and what all that means? I think it's that anxiety. That's my take, at least.
Yeah. I mean, I think it feels true that there's something to that, and also the insecurity that gets tied up with arrogance, meaning that if I hold with such conviction that my way has to be the right way and your way has to be the wrong way, then what other recourse do I have besides being threatened by your difference? Right, and we can say that from a religious perspective, we could say that from a cultural perspective, we could say that politically, right? We're seeing that happen all around our country and all around the world right now. But this intensity of feeling to have to prove that you're wrong so that I can be right, as opposed to, I think what I find to be so compelling about religion and spirituality is that our lives, like what makes us human is the subjectivity of our lives, right? That we each have our own truths, and like you have your truth with your family and descending from Bangladesh and going there tonight, right? Like I don't know any of that, but that doesn't mean that it has to threaten what my life is like, right? And so like what does it look like to move beyond the you have to be like me to be from here, right? In all the sort of white supremacist, patriarchal ways that we've been talking about, but also like, is it that simple? Maybe that like, it's ego-driven as opposed to a sense of like open vulnerability.
Can I respond to that? Sorry, I'm not trying to, but I'm holding what you're saying in tension with structural realities. There's a scholar I studied under in graduate school, Jared Sexton, who said, you better believe white people's opinions and beliefs because tomorrow it'll be policy. And so like, I can have a conversation with you, for example, and Janan, in which I understand the difference and the complexity, and I have a different anxiety talking to someone like Matt, not Matt personally, right, because I've gotten to know him a bit, but whereby, your opinions are part of a different kind of, may have a different kind of effect. And even so, all of us are swimming in it. Like we have all, as you said, there is an unconscious bias, right? Whereby it's not just your opinion. How does your opinion reinforce a system, right? That is, the interpersonal for me, as feminists say, the personal is political. I struggle outside of Appalachia, where things are very bipartisan, or maybe outside of just Berea or Kentucky, whereby if I'm having conversations, there's an anxiety about, especially in today's America, I'm Iranian. How that's going to be placed within a structural reality that then will come back and bite me in the ass.
For sure. No, I mean, I think the nature of being a person in the world is you have to think about those things, right? Like if you don't, what does your survival look like? What does safety look like for you? So I think that's 100% true. And so how can we bridge? In some ways, I think that's the nature of this larger festival, right? Like how do you bridge the beautiful aspirations we have as people and the wisdom we've received, and even like the aspirations of this country with the lived realities of all the ugliness and the challenges we're facing and the policies we're trying to survive or change or fix or whatever it is, and like, can we meet in the middle somewhere? Can not even meeting in the middle, can we connect those? And it feels so hard, Like right now, it feels so hard to connect the beautiful ideas with the lived realities, and I think the chasm between those two is power, right? Like, how do we bring power together to pull these together? But I think you're right that those are true, and also the aspirations are true, right? And so how do we do that? Yeah. And as bell hooks, as you pointed out, like what did bell hooks say? Like how do you do? Like what does revolution look like? Yeah. It's when we learn to love.
And
the
to
earth,
love ourselves,
right? And to love
especially.
ourselves, yeah.
You know, she talked about like when you don't love yourself, you become an implement of that imperialist white supremacist patriarchy.
Yeah.
So if you all had actionable strategies or ideas that are practical and something that someone can walk out of this space and do differently based on your stories or based on what you hope for this audience, what's something you'd say? I'll start with you, Matt.
I mean, I keep thinking about where is the common ground if people are on all ends of spectrums politically and people have different faith traditions. So like what are the things that are okay to be that first softening of the beachhead in getting to know someone deeper? And we think about this a lot at the University of Virginia. There's a wide swath of individuals coming from legacy families and first-gen families, people from the city of Charlottesville and people from all around the world. And then what are the ways in which we can kind of get around a common sense of what is this community like? And that's why during the first week there's orientation, but there's norm setting. And the norm setting is not about like, okay, let's talk politics. At the University of Virginia, the first thing they talk about is the honor code. They talk about student self-governance. And the honor code's pretty simple. No lying, cheating, and stealing. I mean, like, if we can all agree on these common things, and then in the afternoon, go to a football game and cheer on the team that is usually really bad, but this year, for some reason, is really good, as we were talking about earlier, find some commonality in that, right? In broad, big ideas, and then in little things that are not really all that important, but that are bonding and that are bridging, like going to a shared sporting event.
How about you?
In the 70s, during the heyday of the labor movement, and especially kind of the second wave? I don't do waves. You know, when there was a big push for women to enter the workplace, Toni Cade Bambara, a black feminist thinker, said, get your house in order. Who's cleaning your house and taking care of your kids while you're out there banging pots and pans? Are you paying them a fair wage? Are they being paid under the table? Are they being paid less than they should? And so for me, when you ask what are some tangible strategies, it's what is your ethical orientation in the world? How do you operate with a kind of integrity wherein you live into those commitments? It's one thing to sign, it's another thing to do. And so I think it's that accountability whereby, like, who are you hiring? What kind of conditions in the workplace are you know? It's often the case, I really believe the academy is killing women of color, and especially black women. And I believe it's the unsustainable rate that Bell talked about, and the ways in which that extra pressure is put on them. Well, how can you alleviate that pressure? Why isn't there a person of color on that main team, you know? These are the kinds of questions that I think, you know, how are you living into it? Don't just wait for the structure to change. That would be and perhaps there's a person of color just not pictured.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not trying to pick on Matt. This is the same problem everywhere, right? And why? Well, you know, that person just talks more articulate, dresses more professional. You know, well, I'm sorry, that other person has curves. Like, where are our ideas coming from? Let's break apart the common sense of respectability politics and bourgeois belonging to instead find the kind of belonging Bell did among a kind of non-agential, land-based, earth-based community that could actually, if we live into that, maybe our hierarchies will fall apart. I feel so bad, man. I want to sit next to you and apologize. Matt is so lovely.
There's room on the couch for everyone.
Matt is so lovely, and it's not about UVA, you know. It's about conditions of possibility. Conditions of possibility. Liberalism, liberal art says everyone has a seat at the table. Even when we remake it, everyone pull up a seat. I don't want the lone gunman at my table. I just don't. Because when he comes to campus, he's not going for the white president. He's coming for me. You know? So I think it's just our logics of inclusion. You know, we have a new person who's trying to, at the college, help us live into these 8 great commitments that founded Berea College. Berea is the first interracial and coeducational college in the South. Founded by radical abolitionists on 8 great commitments, including the dignity of all labor, gender equity and impartial love, racial equity, service to Appalachia, and the list goes on. But the question becomes, okay, how are you living into it, right? And so our new dean made a comment that said, okay, you can open the door. Doesn't mean everyone's going to walk in. Doesn't mean your door has to change. Right? And I want us to try to remember that. Opening the door as a welcome, as that hospitality move, doesn't mean everyone's going to walk in. It doesn't mean the terms of invitation need to change.
Any final words?
Yeah, I'm thinking about this bridge that we were just sort of exploring. How do you take these beautiful aspirations and bring them into reality? And I think that's the challenge of faith, right? That's the hard part. It's easy to announce or preach or, just say I will do this thing, but it's hard to do. And I'm thinking about this opening story with my daughter around unconditional love, where there's so much urgency there, and also the condition of possibility is met, right? I'm not going to do that. And so I wonder if, so often as I talk to people all over, they're like, how do I love someone who hates me? How do I love someone who wants me dead? Yeah. And I understand that because I experienced that. And also I wonder if that's the wrong question. And maybe the starting place, instead of trying from the top down at the macro level like we do in this country, right? We're always like, what scale? What does scale look like? But I think actually the answer is already close to us, right? It's the people in our home, the people around us, and you expand the circle and you sort of grow your capacity for unconditional love. And so that feels really doable, and I think maybe that's sort of a nice takeaway for us here.
There's so much heartbreak. Sorry. Can I say one thing to close us off? Yes. There is a lot of us walk away from those kinds of exchange. I was also in high school during the 9/11. It's like there's a lot of rage that comes into us, but Bell Hooks says that rage is just heartbreak. And when Bell identified as a Christian Buddhist, and when she met Thich Nhat Hanh, her spiritual Buddhist teacher, she came out of a bad relationship, and she's interviewed saying, I wanted to go with loving kindness, but I had so much anger and rage. And he said to her, that's okay. Hold on to your rage. Use it as compost for your garden. Great.